The transformation of Palpatine into Darth Sidious involved methods so calculated and thorough that they produced the galaxy's most dangerous being. Through legends and canon sources, the answer reveals an 11-year process of breaking down his mind and rebuilding him as the architect of the Empire. The story begins not with the Sith, but with a troubled family on Naboo. James Luceno's 2012 Legends novel, Darth Plagueis, introduces Palpatine as the heir to House Palpatine, one of Naboo's noble families. Born approximately 84 years before the Battle of Yavin, the young man grew up in a Lake Country estate surrounded by wealth. However, behind this elegant appearance, his childhood was marked by constant mistreatment. His father, Cosina Palpatine, was the head of House Palpatine. He was an alcoholic and a failed politician who took out his frustrations on his family. Cosina had tried for political office and lost. As a result, his bitterness turned him into a harsh and heartless man. The mistreatment was not just physical. Cosina constantly told his son he was worthless and would amount to nothing. Meanwhile, Palpatine's mother remained unnamed, but her role was clear. She enabled the mistreatment and never stepped in to protect them. The young Palpatine had multiple brothers and sisters, all of whom suffered under their father's anger. Yet the mistreatment triggered something far more dangerous. He began to feel a power growing inside of him, something he could not explain or control. Palpatine was Force-sensitive, though he had built walls to hide his power, perhaps since infancy. This power had been bottled up for 17 years. On Naboo, the Force was not part of everyday life. The planet had no Jedi temple and no Force traditions. For this reason, the young man kept this concealed, knowing only that something made him different, setting him apart from everyone around him. By age 17, Palpatine had reached his breaking point. He was consumed by rage at his family and his own powerlessness. He wanted them gone, and the tension between father and son had been building for years. But what happened next would shatter the family forever. Cosina Palpatine arrived unexpectedly on Chandrila and intercepted his son during the Legislative Youth Program. Security guards removed the young Palpatine from the Naboo vessel Jafan 3 and brought him to the family starship. His mother and siblings were already aboard. After launch, Palpatine learned he was being taken to Chamel Minor to live with the Grijatis family, placed out of reach of outside influences. The pair fell into a heated argument in the communications room. Cosina accused his son of disgracing the family, while Palpatine defended himself. As the confrontation escalated, Palpatine's rage finally exploded. In moments of pure fury, he reached out with powers he had kept hidden his entire life. Cosina was hurled against the bulkhead, and when the injured man tried to escape, the bulkhead buckled inward, driving him to the floor. A guard entered, and Palpatine threw him across the cabin. He ended them all, his father, mother, siblings, and guards, using the Force. Just days after the tragedy, help arrived. A moon banker named Hego Damask, whom Palpatine had met during the youth program, sent his agents to assist. Damask arranged for the starship's disposal, leaving no evidence behind. Chandrilan and Naboo authorities searched but found nothing, and without evidence, there was no crime. The meeting that followed would change Palpatine forever. Plagueis secured a private cabin for Palpatine aboard the passenger ship Quantum Colossus. When they met, the young man was still shaken by what he had done. He expected support from someone he considered an ally, but instead, Plagueis challenged him. The Muun explained that he had intentionally orchestrated the confrontation. He had come to Chandrila to ensure Cosina's spies would see them together, wanting to push father and son to a dilemma. Palpatine realized he had been manipulated. Nevertheless, Plagueis explained this was necessary. Before he could reveal certain truths, Palpatine needed to be free from fear of expressing his true nature. Then came the revelation that transformed everything. Plagueis asked if Palpatine had ever learned of the Sith. Palpatine knew little, only that they were a Jedi sect, the result of a family conflict. The Sith were far more than that, Plagueis explained. They were the prodigal offspring, destined to return and overthrow the Jedi. He described them as beings who refused to live by conventional morality, who shaped history rather than merely observing it. Plagueis revealed his true identity. He was not merely a banker, but a Sith Lord. More than that, he explained, just now there was only one Sith, unless Palpatine chose to join him. Plagueis tested Palpatine's abilities during their meetings. He taught the young man basic techniques for sensing through the Force. He showed him how to reach out and feel the living energy around him. He demonstrated powers that seemed impossible. Most importantly, he explained that everything Palpatine had experienced was the Force responding to his emotions. However, the offer that followed came with conditions that would require Palpatine to abandon everything he knew. Plagueis looked at the young nobleman and made an offer. The Moon promised to teach Palpatine everything about the Force. He offered to show him how to use the power that frightened and confused him. He claimed he could transform him into something greater than any Jedi. The offer was tempting beyond measure. Palpatine had spent 17 years feeling powerless despite his family's wealth. Now, someone was offering him real power, the kind that could never be taken away. However, Plagueis made the conditions clear. Accepting this path meant leaving Naboo, abandoning his inheritance, and devoting himself completely to the dark side. With no attachment to his family's legacy and no loyalty to Naboo's traditions, he wanted power more than anything else in the galaxy. As a result, Palpatine accepted Plagueis' offer without hesitation. Months passed between their initial meetings and the next critical moment. During this time, Plagueis taught Palpatine basic Force techniques. He showed him how to hide his abilities from others. He explained the history of the Sith and their long war against the Jedi. He prepared the young man for what was coming. What came next would transform Palpatine completely. Aboard the Quantum Colossus, Plagueis made his final offer. He explained that the dark side was only for those who valued self-determination over all else that existence offered, and that joining would require abiding submission as his only road to salvation. At Plagueis' instruction, Palpatine knelt and pledged to join his destiny forever with the Order of the Sith Lords. Plagueis extended his left hand to touch him on the crown of the head, declaring the pledge complete. From that day forward, Palpatine would be known as Sidious. Yet this was only the beginning of 11 years of brutal conditioning. The training period would span from age 17 to 28. Plagueis would take his new apprentice to multiple worlds, each designed to break him and shape him through the dark side of the Force. The process would be cruel at times and painful, with denial remaining a key factor in Sith training. Every location served a purpose in building the perfect Sith apprentice. On the low-gravity planet Boyant, Plagueis taught him hunting techniques. Sidious learned to become what his master called a predatory swarm, moving silently, stalking prey without detection, and eliminating targets efficiently. He ended the lives of countless creatures during this training, and Plagueis insisted he felt no remorse as they culled the herd, sharpened their skills, and marinated themselves in dark side energy. Following this, the training on Hapori involved combat against battle droids. 200 battle droids, provided by the Techno Union, were deployed against Sidious in a fabricated cityscape. He wielded the lightsaber he had built under Plagueis' guidance as the droids attacked in concentric rings, staggering their assault and triggering bursts at random. Sidious fought for hours, learning to channel his rage into precise strikes while deflecting bolts and destroying the automata one after another. On Cursed, the training revealed how completely the transformation had succeeded. The planet had been reserved for Sith use for 600 years, and indigenous primitives had come to expect the periodic return of sky visitors. Plagueis and Sidious fought against several hundred warriors armed with longbows and metal-tipped lances. They wielded force pikes rather than lightsabers to avoid senseless slaughter, moving across the plain like wraiths and felling opponent after opponent with taps from the stun weapons. When only one warrior remained standing, Plagueis tossed aside his force pike and ignited his crimson blade. He used the force to hurl the warrior to the ground, then opened the primitive's chest cavity with his lightsaber. Reaching inside, he extracted the still-beating heart and raised it overhead as a collective lament rose from the crowds watching on the hillsides. Taking a bite from the organ, Plagueis then passed it to Sidious. Raised in Naboo's refined culture with elegant manners and civilized behavior, Sidious should have recoiled. Instead, he consumed the flesh without hesitation. This marks the completion of his transformation. The refined nobleman from Naboo had become a being willing to do anything for power. During these 11 years, Sidious learned every skill a Sith needed: Force lightning, telepathy, manipulation, elimination techniques, lightsaber combat, and Force concealment. Each ability was practiced until it became natural. Plagueis demanded perfection, responding to failure with punishment and to hesitation with contempt. The training in Force lightning proved particularly significant. Plagueis warned his apprentice that to summon and use lightning properly, he would someday have to be on the receiving end of its power as a means of taking the energy inside himself. Yet combat skills alone would not bring down the Republic. Plagueis understood that true power came not from Force abilities, but from controlling the invisible systems that held civilization together. According to Sidious's own writings in the Book of Sith, Plagueis's greatest talent was manipulating what he called the strings that kept the galaxy from degenerating into chaos. Plagueis maintained contact with beings across the galaxy who shaped entire star systems, yet remained unknown to ordinary citizens. He cultivated relationships with leaders from the Intergalactic Banking Clan, executives in the Corporate Alliance, viceroys in the Trade Federation, and even criminal organizations like Black Sun. These were not allies, but useful bureaucrats who could be controlled through greed, ambition, or fear. Most importantly, Plagueis taught Sidious how to view other beings. There were only two categories: those who wielded power and those who existed to serve. Everyone outside the Sith was inferior, and their only value resided in their usefulness. They owed the Sith everything, including their lives, the truth of the universe as Plagueis understood it. This philosophy restructured how Sidious experienced human connection. Where normal beings felt empathy, Sidious learned to feel contempt. Where others experienced guilt, he felt satisfaction. Where people sought genuine relationships, he saw only tools to be used and discarded. The transformation was so complete that Sidious would later write that the weak must be trained to accept their own worthlessness and punished when they failed to serve properly. Plagueis also perfected what Sidious called the art of institutional hiding. Darth Bane had hidden in the shadows, staying unknown. Plagueis went further by hiding in plain sight while wielding institutional power. He taught Sidious that the best disguise was not invisibility, but the appearance of being ordinary, trustworthy, and even weak. People wanted to believe their leaders were like them, so appearing vulnerable generated sympathy, while actual power remained concealed. The lesson would prove essential. Sidious would later spend decades as Senator and Supreme Chancellor, deceiving even Jedi Masters face to face without ever breaking character. He would convince Yoda to send Jedi into danger while appearing to help them. He would dismantle democracy while being praised as its greatest defender. Not once in over 30 years would anyone detect a Sith Lord hiding behind the mask of the concerned public servant. By age 28, Sidious had become everything Plagueis intended, and the galaxy would never know what was coming. Around 56 BBY, Sidious's training finally concluded. By this point, he had mastered every technique Plagueis taught him. He could fight, eliminate targets, manipulate, and deceive without hesitation. More importantly, he had learned to hide his nature completely. This concealment proved perhaps the most critical skill. Plagueis had taught Sidious techniques to hide in plain sight, to be submerged in the unified pattern to which the Jedi were attuned. He would remain visible in the Force, but not as a Sith. Hidden among ordinary life, masked by everyday routines, his true nature would be beyond detection. This ability would prove essential for what came next. In 56 BBY, a Naboo senator named Vidar Kim was eliminated on Coruscant. It turns out that Sidious arranged this. He hired Maladians, a species known for such work, through his first major recruit, Sate Pistage. The operation was clean and professional, leaving no evidence pointing back to Sidious. With Kim gone, Sidious took his place as Naboo's senator. This position suited his goals perfectly. As a senator, he had access to the Republic's political center. This position allowed him to observe the government's inner workings, identify its weaknesses, and build a network of allies and agents to eventually seize control. The transition from Sith apprentice to senator was seamless. Sidious presented himself as a dedicated public servant. He was charming, intelligent, and committed to Naboo's interests. He befriended other senators, joined committees, and worked on legislation, all while studying the Republic's weak points. Remarkably, Sidious even interacted with Jedi without being detected. Ronar Kim, the son of the eliminated senator, was a Jedi Knight. He investigated his father's death and met with Sidious multiple times, while Count Dooku and Sifo Dyas worked with him on political matters. Despite their combined expertise, none of these Jedi Masters detected the Sith Lord hiding in plain sight. However, in 52 BBY, Sidious made a decision that would complicate the rule of two. He traveled to Dathomir, a planet home to the Night Sisters, a group of Force-sensitive women who practiced dark-side techniques. Mother Talzin, the Night Sisters' leader, wanted a particular infant male Zabrak for her own purposes, but another Night Sister sought to save the child from that fate. Believing Sidious could protect the boy better than she could, she offered him the infant. Maul's role was never intended to be that of a true Sith apprentice. Sidious already held that position under Plagueis, and according to the rule of two, only one apprentice could exist at a time. Instead, Maul would become something different, a weapon skilled in stealth and combat, to be eliminated when no longer needed. In Legends continuity, Plagueis eventually heard of Maul but tolerated him as a Sith assassin, rather than a true successor, even providing Sidious with the stealth ship to gift to Maul. Plagueis had earlier told Sidious that they would transcend Bane's rule of two entirely, sharing all knowledge without the traditional master-apprentice betrayal cycle. The Moons saw Maul as a useful weapon, not a violation of their partnership. In canon, however, reference materials suggest Plagueis died before Sidious took Maul as his apprentice, thus preserving the rule of two strictly. With Maul's role clearly defined as that of an assassin, his training focused on combat rather than Sith philosophy. On Mustafar and later at the Orsis Academy, Sidious pushed the young Zabrak to his absolute limits using methods similar to those Plagueis had employed on him. He taught Maul to channel rage and hatred into combat effectiveness. Unfortunately, unlike his own comprehensive education under Plagueis, Sidious never taught Maul political manipulation or long-term strategy. In 42 BBY, 25 years into Sidious's apprenticeship, something unprecedented happened that would tilt the Force itself. This was the most critical event in the entire story. Plagueis and Sidious traveled to a secure location where they could meditate without interruption. They remained there for months, focused entirely on a single objective. Their goal was to influence the Force itself. For thousands of years, the Jedi had maintained balance. The light side was dominant. The dark side existed, but it was contained and controlled. Plagueis and Sidious intended to change that basic reality. They succeeded. They willed the Force to shift and tip irrevocably to the dark side. This was not just a philosophical change. It was a real change to the fabric of reality. The Force itself began favoring darkness over light. The balance that the Jedi had maintained for thousands of years started to collapse. This was not immediate. The shift happened gradually, but once it began, it could not be stopped. The Jedi would eventually sense that something was wrong. However, by the time they noticed, it would be too late to reverse the change. This event was the foundation for everything that followed: the Clone Wars, the fall of the Republic, and the rise of the Empire. The consequences appeared quickly. Immediately after this shift, Plagueis' plans began succeeding at an unprecedented rate. The election of Finis Valorum as Supreme Chancellor in 40 BBY went exactly as planned. Plagueis had been cultivating Valorum for years. Valorum was weak and easily manipulated, which made him perfect for their purposes. Plagueis had also been working with the Trade Federation. He helped them gain power and influence. He arranged favorable legislation. He removed their competitors. He made them dependent on his financial support. In turn, they became tools he could use when needed. Newt Gunray, the viceroy of the Trade Federation, owed everything to Plagueis and Sidious. However, as Sidious grew stronger, he began to see possibilities his master could not. Growing tension emerged between Plagueis and Sidious during the final years of their partnership. Plagueis was obsessed with achieving immortality through midichlorian manipulation. He spent endless hours in his laboratory on Abora, conducting experiments attempting to create life and prevent death. Sidious participated in some of these experiments. He learned the scientific approach to the Force that Plagueis favored. Nevertheless, Sidious's interests lay elsewhere. He cared more about political power than biological immortality. He understood that controlling the galaxy required controlling its institutions: the Senate, the military, the economy, and public opinion. Their different priorities created tension. Plagueis believed that mastering life and death was the ultimate goal. Sidious believed that ruling the galaxy was more important than living forever. These conflicting visions would eventually lead to the inevitable conclusion of their relationship. As seen in the 2005 film Revenge of the Sith, Sidious would eventually tell Anakin Skywalker about his master. The scene takes place at the galaxy's opera house on Coruscant. Sitting in the shadows, Palpatine shares what he calls the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. He explains that Plagueis had such knowledge of the dark side that he could influence midichlorians to create life and keep people from dying. Matthew Stover's novelization of Revenge of the Sith expands on this conversation, revealing additional details about Plagueis' research and abilities. However, both the film and the novelization make one thing clear: Plagueis taught his apprentice everything he knew. This was his fatal mistake. The death of Plagueis occurred in 32 BBY, on the night before Palpatine's election as Supreme Chancellor. Following a performance at the galaxy's opera house and a celebration dinner, the two Sith Lords retired to Plagueis' penthouse in the Kaldani Spires to prepare for the Senate vote. The moon was in high spirits, convinced that decades of planning had finally reached fruition. As the evening progressed, they opened bottle after bottle of rare Seleucid wine. Plagueis, who had trained himself to go without sleep for 20 years, allowed himself to relax in celebration of their impending victory. He drank heavily while discussing the grand plan's success, never noticing when his breathing began to slow. In that moment, the apprentice Plagueis had created destroyed him. Without warning, blue force lightning erupted from Sidious's fingertips and struck the moon's breathing device. Plagueis' eyes snapped open in shock, yet he hesitated to defend himself. He trusted Sidious completely and could not comprehend that his own apprentice would betray him. That hesitation proved fatal. As Plagueis struggled for breath, Sidious revealed the truth. The apprentice had learned all his master's secrets and no longer needed him. Every recent success Plagueis had claimed as his own had actually been Sidious's manipulation. Yinchor, Dorvala, Eriadu, the Neimoidians, Naboo, all of it had been carefully orchestrated by the apprentice, while the master congratulated himself on his genius. The rule of two demanded that the apprentice eventually surpass the master, and that moment had finally arrived. Desperately, Plagueis tried to use his midichlorian manipulation to save himself, but the techniques that worked on others failed when applied to his own dying body. The irony was absolute. Plagueis had spent decades researching how to prevent death and had discovered techniques that could influence life itself. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. He died gasping for air, while his apprentice explained that he had been deceived from the very beginning. The being who had broken Palpatine and created Darth Sidious became the first victim of his own success. The next morning, Palpatine was elected Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. Days later, he traveled to Naboo to congratulate Queen Amidala on her victory over the Trade Federation. Only upon arriving in Theed did he learn that Darth Maul had been killed during the Battle of Naboo. The Zabrak had succeeded in eliminating Qui-Gon Jinn, but Obi-Wan Kenobi had defeated him in turn. The timing seemed significant, as if the dark side itself had demanded payment for Sidious's ascension. When informed of Maul's death, Sidious felt no grief. His reaction was a simple acknowledgement of an expected outcome. The tool had been destroyed, and he would acquire new tools when necessary. This was the important lesson Plagueis had taught him through decades of careful instruction. Everything and everyone was expendable except power itself. The techniques Plagueis used to forge Sidious would persist long after both Sith Lords were gone. The canon novel Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher reveals that Sidious continued Plagueis' work on life manipulation. After his apparent end in Return of the Jedi, his essence survived. The Sith Eternal, a cult of followers on the hidden world of Exegol, worked to resurrect him through cloning. Massive cloning facilities operated on Exegol, where cultists trained in dark-side techniques attempted to create a body that could house Sidious's spirit. Many clones failed and were called rejected matter before being disposed of. One Strand cast named Dathan survived, but lacked force sensitivity. He eventually escaped, married a woman named Miramir, and had a daughter named Rey. The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary provides additional details about the Sith Eternal's operations. The cult had been working on Exegol for a generation, maintaining ancient Sith knowledge while building a massive fleet of Star Destroyers. Each vessel was equipped with planet-destroying weapons, powered by enslaved workers and tortured kyber crystals. In the depths of Exegol's citadel, the Sith Eternal cultists chant during their rituals, repeating the name of the Moon Sith Lord over and over. Decades later, Plagueis remains spoken with reverence by those who practice his dark science. This reveals the complete success of Plagueis' methods. He did not just create one powerful Sith Lord, but a system that would outlive both of them. The techniques he taught Sidious for political manipulation became doctrine for the Sith Eternal. The life creation experiments he pioneered enabled the cloning program. The patient, long-term planning he demonstrated shaped the decades-long fleet construction. The breaking of Palpatine was so thorough that the transformation survived decades beyond invisible control through secret bases, systematic use of enslaved labor, patient planning spanning generations, and ruthless treatment of all beings as expendable tools. Even his own granddaughter, Rey, was hunted by agents like Oki of Bestoon, who received orders from Sidious's preserved consciousness while being promised Exegol as a reward. For 30 years, the Sith Eternal built civilization-ending weapons in complete secrecy, creating a system that kept working no matter what happened. The techniques Plagueis pioneered actually worked, though he never lived to perfect them. His student finished what he started. The transformation spawned cults of followers and reshaped the galaxy for generations. Everything the Sith Eternal built, from their cloning science to their patient fleet construction, reflected lessons Plagueis had taught on distant training worlds decades earlier. But Plagueis was far more than the master who broke Palpatine. The Moon Sith Lord had his own journey from apprentice to Dark Lord, his own obsessions with immortality and midichlorian manipulation, and his own master who shaped him through methods just as intense. To understand how this master manipulator was created, watch the full story of Darth Plagueis next.